Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to be continuing taking a look at the Batman Knightfall event, and looking more specifically at the Omnibus Volume 2, the Knightquest storyline, collected in here. Now, yesterday I did cover the first volume on this event, and feel free to check that out if you haven't already and you're interested. But I thought I'd just keep things moving and go through the full thing really, and just get it covered, get it under my belt, so to speak. Now, first thing I really want to draw attention to is what you're seeing right here, is this dust jacket cover. Now, this is by Kelly Jones, who, as I mentioned in my previous review, he came back and did the covers and the artwork for each of the dust jackets for the 3 volumes covering the Knightfall saga, for these omnibus specifically. And I think it's cool on one hand that he came back and did that, given that he was involved with a lot of the cover art for the original content. However, has to be said, like, this image, this Azrael as Batman, is just about, I'm sorry to say, one of the worst covers I think I've ever seen for any book. I really don't like this, and I'm sorry to anyone who does, but this is just bizarre. The anatomy is so weird. It's just really odd cover choice. I think it's my least favourite cover, certainly, of any book that I own. It's got to take that kind of dubious honour for me. The other issue, though, aside from that, is just, yet again, I mentioned with the first volume, it's the spines, because they designed it in such a way that they're using the full wraparound to cover the spine. It's just, yeah, it makes for a very weird spine when you've got the book on the shelf, and, you know, which, especially when they're all together and none of them match. But there you go. That's obviously not the most important thing, but I felt like I had to point it out because I'm not a fan of this one, guys, I have to say. So what you're getting in here anyway, though, to focus on the content and move on to that. Same artwork underneath the dust jacket, by the way, just minus the text. It's just so ugly. Yeah, to move into the book, I do like these bookend pages that they do for each of the volumes. They use really cool choices of images for those. But what we're looking at here then, so as of the end of the first volume, that book left off with Azrael, Jean-Paul Valley, having taken the place of Batman following Bruce Wayne having been taken out of commission by Bane. So I'll give a spoiler warning here, just as I did with the first book. I'm going to cover some key plot points really, but there's not as much kind of going on, I would say, specifically in this book. The plot doesn't really move forward through the same kind of number of different plot points as the first book did. I think overall the first book is a more enjoyable read, the first omnibus, the stuff in there, just because the story is a bit more fast-paced. I think it's a bit more interesting, there's more going on. What you get in here, for the most part, is you're just seeing more and more of Azrael as Batman, or Asbat, as a lot of people like to refer to him as during this time. You see here he's got this newly designed costume, which is very different from the traditional Batman costume, the Batsuit. Yeah, and so what you're really getting is more, I suppose, more insight into his character to an extent. You see him adapting more and more into his own role as this new version of Batman that he is. He quickly gets rid of the Batmobile, which is one thing that's quite interesting, I think. And instead, he designs this kind of super train, it's like a little car. Well, it's kind of like a Batmobile in a sense, but it's more like a train. It runs on the tracks underneath Gotham, and it just goes at these kind of ridiculous speeds, and that's how he travels around Gotham City. So he doesn't have a car specifically as such in the traditional sense of the Batmobile. He's driving around underneath the city on these tracks. But yeah, so he's basically, as this goes on more and more, he's kind of losing himself, Azrael. He's having these visions, which all links back to his past with the secret order of Saint-Dumas, when they kind of psychologically conditioned him from birth to try and ultimately become an assassin. So he's having all these visions of his, I think it's of his dad and of, I don't know, the ghost of Saint-Dumas himself. So he's kind of, you know, more and more, the point is just being proven that he's he's mentally unfit to be Batman. You know, he's not well. And he starts to become more and more brutal as he fights criminals. So he's going further. He's taking steps beyond what Bruce Wayne ever did. You know, Bruce Wayne had a line that he wouldn't cross as Batman. You know, strictly non-lethal. Doesn't start cutting up criminals, you know, and Azrael does. You know, he's got far deadlier gadgets. You know, he's got these claws, these talons, these on his bat suit that he literally just cuts into people with, and is basically hurting people to a greater extent than Bruce Wayne ever did or does as Batman. And that's interesting because it does bring him into conflict with the police. You know, the Commissioner Gordon suspects strongly that this is not the same man as the Batman he knew, and he basically distances himself from Batman. He stops working closely with him as he had done previously, because this Batman's just going too far. You know, Azrael is not working within the law. Not that, well, I mean, strictly speaking, Batman doesn't work within the law as a vigilante. But like I say, you know, Bruce Wayne as Batman has rules that he doesn't break. And Azrael doesn't care about that really much. He's got his own mission, or his own crusade as he refers to it. Here's one of the scenes where he comes into conflict a bit with Gordon. And at the same time, you know, Azrael at this point has firmly driven a wedge in the Batman-Robin partnership. So Tim Drake, who's Robin at this time, is pretty much totally flying solo. He's also trying to spy on Azrael a little bit. But yeah, Azrael has made it clear in no uncertain terms to Robin that he doesn't want to work with him. But my main issue really with this, I suppose, is that it just, like so many events, so many big events like this, this section of the story with Azrael as Batman, it just really goes on for too long. I think this is where it starts to drag. I think the pacing throughout the stuff in the first volume is really good because things don't really stagnate at any point. You know, the plot's continually moving forward. You know, it's all about the introduction of Bane, and then Bane strategically wearing down Batman through introducing other villains for him to fight, and then the confrontation with Bane himself, and then the aftermath of that. You know, there's stuff going on constantly. In here, not so much. You know, it's just more of the same sort of thing. We see Azrael descending further into a state of, I don't know, not exactly madness, but he's not well. It's clearly like becoming more and more unstable, I suppose you could say, psychologically. There are a couple of crossovers with Catwoman. This is the 90s Catwoman, the Jim Ballant series. Pretty cool artwork that he did on this series. Quite a good Catwoman series overall. And in here, Azrael is kind of targeting her, just treating her like a criminal, really. Doesn't have that same relationship, obviously, with her that Bruce Wayne did. So she starts to realise that it's not the same Batman as well. She doesn't feature prominently in the story, Catwoman. She just shows up a little bit here and there. But anyway, yeah, so it's just this fact that, it's like the writers just hammering the point home again and again, emphasising more than they really needed to, that this guy is not right for being Batman. Here's one of the hallucinations that he has, like one of the visions where he thinks he's talking to Sam Dumas. Yeah, it just goes on too long, you know. It's like, before you get through this, they've long since made the point. It's very obvious and clear to you as the reader that we know this guy is not a good Batman. That's clear from a very early stage, but they keep showing these stories again and again where it's like, see, he's not a good Batman, he's not the right fit for the role. And you're just kind of thinking, yeah, I know. Just a bit, like I say, just to reiterate again, I think my issue with this is I just felt the length of the story, you know, like more so than I did with the first volume. Nice cracking spine there. It is a mixture of glued binding, which is why you hear that cracking sometimes as you move it around. I think it's sewn and glued binding. yeah, so more and more, the Joker, you know, he comes into the story a little bit, but again, not a major villain. He's just doing some kind of typical Joker schemes. I think he's got a scheme that all centers around filming a movie. Filming a movie and trying to bring Batman into it and kill him as part of the movie. I don't know. It's like an old school Joker plot, you know. So gradually, Asbat is crossing the line a little bit further and further, and then finally there comes a fight against a serial killer who's tormenting Gotham, a guy called Abattoir. And Batman's on his case. Asbat is on his case, chasing him down. And there comes a key moment where Abattoir is kind of about to fall to his death, and Azrael has the opportunity to save him, and he chooses not to. So he very consciously lets him die. And Robin witnesses it, and that's kind of like the last straw, really, for him. And it's supposed to, I suppose, be the last straw for you as the reader, as you see Azrael break this, the one key rule of Batman, you know. Even though he didn't specifically kill him, he effectively did, because he chose not to save him when he easily could have. So, yeah, that ends up being kind of the key moment, really, I suppose. The one definitive moment where it's clear as day that this guy is not supposed to be Batman. But honestly, there's not a lot more to say about this run, in my opinion. Well, this section of the book, really, because, as I say, it's just plenty of individual stories, but all really just serving the larger purpose of showing us that Azrael is not a good Batman. And I've said that so many times already up to this point, but that's really all this is, and that's my biggest problem with it, and why I can't say it's as strong as the stuff in the first volume. Because I feel, honestly, that a lot of this could be trimmed down to cut out a lot of the less significant points and streamline it, make it much more enjoyable. This is the fight with Abattoir, though. So this is this guy, Abattoir, and this is the scene where he falls into this kind of molten pit. He's clinging onto this. Batman just kind of says, "No, I'm not going to help you," pretty much. And he goes, he drops in. Robin sees it. Yeah, so it's obviously very bad, and it's not Batman-like. So that's really the concluding part of the story here in this book for Azrael. What you then get towards the end, which was the first time I think that included this stuff. There's a section featuring Bruce Wayne, who is at this point in a wheelchair, following his injuries at the hands of Bane in the previous volume. And it's a storyline called The Search. So whilst all this had been going on, it's about 3/4 of the book is Azrael as Batman, becoming more and more unstable, beating criminals more and more brutally. And then you move into this final quarter of the book, roughly, which is The Search. Now, in previous collections of Knightquest, which is all this stuff, I believe, The Search had always been left out, but then finally they restored it and they put it in here, into the omnibus, for the sake of completionism, which I think is highly appreciated. It's good to have it, because what this is, it's the story of Bruce Wayne and Alfred, who have left Gotham at this point in time. Bruce has left Azrael as Batman, and he's left Tim there as Robin, and as far as he's aware, they're working together, and he doesn't really know that anything is going as badly wrong as it is with Azrael. He doesn't know that Azrael's turning more and more unstable and brutal and letting people die. So he thinks he's left Gotham in fairly good hands, whilst he, meanwhile, and Alfred go off in search of Tim Drake's dad and Bruce's doctor / kind of girlfriend, Dr. Chandra Kinsolving. Both of them had been kidnapped. In here, he's kind of tracking them down. He wants to try and save them. Obviously, he's very limited as what he can do now because his back's been broken. He's in a wheelchair. So here he's working with, what is this? Just the Justice League. I forgot already. Justice League Task Force. A team I really don't know. I don't think I know any of these individual team members really. But that doesn't really matter so much. I'm sure some people will be familiar with them. But I think they're all involved in this one issue or two issues. And they basically help to locate Chandra and Tim Drake's dad. Jack Drake, is it? I think that's his name. Yeah, so they find them, but that ends up going into, becoming more complicated than it seems. Chandra ends up being revealed to be related to yet another villain who's in here. And more Bruce is trying to kind of do the best he can with the injuries that he has, which is really, as always, in typical Bruce Wayne fashion, he's pushing himself more than he really needs to. Alfred's getting more and more concerned about him, stressing again and again that he really shouldn't be doing the things he's doing in the condition he's in. You see scenes like this, for example, where he's trying his best to sort of rehabilitate himself. He goes undercover, he wears this disguise. I think he's in England at this point. He's like undercover as a kind of English aristocrat, kind of upper class type guy. Uncovering an evil scheme, basically, and doing his best to deal with it. It's a pretty good story. I think it's a more interesting story, to be honest, than the vast majority of the Azrael stuff that's going on. I think largely just because, it's involving Bruce Wayne, who naturally, I think you're going to be more interested in as a reader than Azrael as the Asbat, who's just beating up criminals savagely. And that's as much of his story, almost as much to his story as there is, really. But the way that this ends, it basically ends with this book with Bruce being healed. So his back being healed, and physically he kind of, for the most part, goes back to normal. However, the way that that's handled is ridiculous. Even for a comic, it's just kind of, I'll talk about it in a moment. But the other main thing that happens is Alfred leaves. So Alfred decides enough's enough with Bruce and his, almost suicide mission level of strain that he's putting himself through for a guy who pretty much can't even really walk, given the injuries he's got. Alfred decides he's not going to hang around and watch Bruce kill himself doing all this stuff, so he leaves. And he leaves for a while. He doesn't come back till some time later. Anyway, to return to the other key bit then. So Bruce's magical treatment ends up being exactly that. So it gets revealed that basically this Dr. Chandra, she has a kind of healing power, and she uses it on Bruce. Just trying to find the page. It's pretty much right at the end here. Here, I think. Yeah, this is literally it. This page. So this moment, this tiny panel where she touches his hand or his arm, and it just describes that he felt some kind of like magical healing energy flow through him, and then that's it. He's walking, he's up and around again now, he's fine. And then this last issue of Robin, he comes back to Gotham. I mean, to be fair, this is pretty interesting. Finally, you get Bruce Wayne. You read through this entire book, and again, the whole thing is like, it just gets you thinking, gets you feeling like, come on, we need Bruce to come back. We get the point. Azrael is not a good Batman. Bring Bruce back already. You know he's coming back. And finally, at the end of this book, he does. And he sees what's become of the Wayne Manor, which Azrael has just completely neglected it. So it's in a pretty bad state. And he has a little confrontation with Azrael. Bruce basically says, you know, you're not going to be Batman anymore, I'm back, I'm taking over again. Azrael resists. He's kind of like, no, I'm Batman now, get out. So it all sets up for the events of what goes on in the third volume, where Bruce is going to have to literally fight to take back the mantle of Batman. And then, you know, you get some extras in the back. So my main thing here is just kind of like the way that they heal Bruce and they bring him back. Nice bookend page again. It's just such a kind of cheap thing, you know. It's like the writers had written themselves into a corner with Batman having his spine broken. They got the kind of dramatic shock effect that they wanted from that. But then they have that, you know, that problem. How do we heal him? How do we bring him back? Because ultimately, obviously, they want to bring him back, and it's the same kind of thing that what went on with Superman and the death of Superman. You know, you killed him off, you got the shock value that you wanted, but then you have the issue of how do you bring him back again? And in both instances, it's just kind of like a really quick, rushed explanation where it's almost like they wanted to cover it so quickly and move on, hoping that the reader wouldn't stop and go, wait, what? But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I suppose it is what it is. It's comic books. It's a lot of made-up nonsense a lot of the time. But I just feel like they could have done something a little bit better, maybe. That's just me, though, I suppose. Anyway, that's at the end of this book. You're all set up for the third book, and I will be covering that very soon as I can, and we'll get this trilogy of Omnis finished off and covered on the channel. But anyway, as always, guys, thanks for looking through this. I hope it was interesting or insightful in some way to you. Let me know in the comments what you think about the book or the Knightfall story as a whole. And please put a like on the video. You know, I always appreciate that support if you can do that for me. But again, thanks for watching, and I'll be back again soon with the third and final volume of Knightfall.